most sought after feature is V-Ray DBR support. So this is a whole new interface that allows us to submit a job to deadline that starts up the V-Ray DBR spawner process, and then that allows the DBR to take place. Now, it's not a job in the true sense of a deadline job. It processes the DBR by offloading it, and the DBR job actually works completely on the render farm. It's the idea of reserving a certain number of slaves in your render farm, effectively giving them a job which spins up the V-Ray spawner process, and then they no longer pick up other jobs in the deadline queue. That's really important when you've got multiple different job types going into your queue, and you've also got lighting and rendering artists who need to get some V-Ray DBR render support by using a couple of machines as well. So it comes as an in-application interface for both Max and Maya. I'll show you the Max one in a moment. It updates automatically once you reserve a job, submit a job into the queue, and then it reserves the slaves. And then it reports back that it's then ready to start the DBR render. And we'll just have a look at that now. So it's a separate user interface from the submit max to deadline SMTD interface. So we just need to add that script using the same principle as we would add the SMTD interface, and then we can add it into the menu system in Max. It brings up this interface here. And with this comes popular common settings such as pool, group, priority, limits, machine list. You can give it a name as well. We're going to say a maximum of, say, 2 servers. So I've been told I can only use up to, say, 2 deadline slaves, but this more than likely is going to be dependent on your V-Ray licensing that you have in your studio. Bear in mind that V-Ray 2 and V-Ray 3 Chaos Group have changed the licensing, their licensing model. So indeed, you may need to consider how many servers you can start up for distributed bucket rendering, depending on what version of V-Ray. So really just it's a case of knowing your licensing and knowing your numbers here to dial up or down the server count. You notice here that the rest is grayed out, and we can click on reserve servers. Now, I've got V-Ray as my renderer, but I've actually forgotten to turn on V-Ray distributed rendering. It's just reminded me here, and it will automatically turn it on for me if I hit yes. But I'm just going to say no, because I want to show you something else. If we go into the V-Ray settings here, I'm using version 3, but it'll work for 2. If we go into settings, yeah, I've not turned on distributed rendering, so I can just do that manually by clicking it on. But what happens when we go into settings? Well, we can see that there's I've already been using this earlier. That's my Windows machine and the port range. And normally you'd have to type in the computer name to know which ones to type in. Someone would tell you it's changed. You've got to change it to another computer now. Actually, we're going to update this list dynamically. So actually, you want to leave this list completely empty. Perhaps consider using the transfer asset caching system here that's new to V-Ray 3 to cache textures and whatnot locally on each render node. That could be very useful. Save on bandwidth. And I don't actually even want to use my local host for some of the processing as well, so I'll just click OK to that. But the key thing is that this list here of hosts is empty. The reason it's empty is because we're going to reserve some deadline slaves in the queue. Notice that I've submitted a job into the queue. It says submitted successfully. The job ID has been entered in here. That's what the deadline job ID looks like. And you saw here that this was blank, the job status, but now it's turned to queued. The reason for that, if we just jump into deadline monitor for a second, is we'll see here that a job here has been submitted, which is a V-Ray spawner job with 2 tasks, because I said, yep, use 2 servers, and it's just sat there and it's in the queued state. So what we want to do now is obviously on your render node, slave would be running. So I'm just going to run it manually by running slave locally on this same machine, which obviously makes no sense if you were doing processing, but this is just for demonstration. So we start up slave, and what we'll see is it picks up the wrong job, which is brilliant. So we will suspend these, and we'll try that again. Didn't have to stop the shut down the slave, it's just quicker whilst we're in this demo. V-Ray spawner job picks up. Please note that the V-Ray spawner executable icon, whose only function it has is to allow you to click on it and click exit, is down there in my system tray windows. And also, of course, the spawner's running. You see here that there's a second copy instance of Max running. At the moment it says untitled, but the way in which DBR works, the spawner needs to run up its V-Ray dummy, which allows it to talk to the V-Ray spawner executable and open up a socket so it can then give communication back to the machine that we want to do DBR rendering on. So whilst all that's happening, the status has changed to rendering because it's been picked up, the job's been picked up in queue, and we've reported back and dynamically filled the list with one or more hosts. So in this example, we've just got one. But with this now in place and active servers selected, we can click on the Start Render button and then do multiple iterations using V-Ray DBR. Now, at any time, if you close this interface, the red X in Max, or indeed if we go to the deadline queue and right-click the rendering task and say fail it or complete it, or we right-click and suspend it or complete it or fail the entire job, then obviously it breaks that connection. But the beauty of this is that when it breaks that connection in any of the approaches I just described, it means that the deadline slave will actually shut down, will tidy up after itself, which I can't see, and will, where is it? I can't see. There it is. It's just hidden. Why are you hiding from me? What's wrong with you? If we close the deadline slave or shut it down via closing the job, then the V-Ray spawn executable will be cleaned up. A good way to see this, actually, and this is kind of sort of a real benefit to running this whole system this way round, is actually if we look at the process and the children. By that I mean the deadline launcher is the parent which controls the slave. The deadline slave, because it's running as a job, is controlling the V-Ray spawner, which is then controlling the copy of Max. So at any time, if we reschedule and say, slave, please stop doing this job, we can guarantee that we're going to shut down and get rid of that copy of Max, which sometimes spawner has been known to have, and we also cleanly exit and get rid of the V-Ray spawner as well. Let's see that when we actually go back to our Max file. Let's close the in-app interface. The V-Ray spawner job will be completed. Okay. So what's happened? So this job is being completed. How do we see that? Well, you can see here that the executable is still running. The V-Ray spawner is still running. No, it's not, because deadline slave has just checked in on its scheduling and seen that actually that particular task for that job has been rescheduled effectively. So it gets rid of it. So the deadline slave cleans up after itself and gets rid of the spawner, which gets rid of the Max file. You can also see this with the deadline monitor in that the job is completed, and you can see it cleans up on itself. I think it's going to make V-Ray spawner more reliable for people, and it's a good way to work is via deadline.